Recording. We're gonna start. Mama says go ahead. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We're excited to have you all here today. Um, just want to say this will be our first Pacifica webinar in a series that we here at the Pacific Island Studies Initiative, the University of Utah, are just starting this fall. And we just wanted to introduce the mission and vision of the University of Utah Pacific Island Studies Initiative Bridge Program is to build a fertile, mutualistic relationship between Pacific Islander communities and the University of Utah that demystifies the institution for prospective students and helps recruit, retain, and graduate Pacific Islander students. As we shared before, this is our first Pacifica webinar series event. It's a continuation of the Pacifica Scholars Summer Institute that is bridging culture, community, and education through Talanoa. It started as a response to COVID and our limited ability to safely meet in person. So we intend to amplify our Pacifica community's voices and bring thought leaders and students here on this platform to provide resources for higher education at the University of Utah. Today, I will be moderating, and then we will make this webinar available on our Pacifica archive after this session. We welcome all those who are here in the audience, and a special thanks to Dr. Kehaulani Van, Kale Tutupo, and Kaimana Kahale for bringing this webinar all into our living rooms. A couple of housekeeping items before we start. Just please recognize this is a 1 hour format. We will end with a Q&A for our guest speakers today. And without further ado, I'd like to thank our guest speakers, and I'll introduce them quickly, and then go straight away into our conversation or Talanoa. So I'd like to introduce, and these are just cliff notes on these folks because their lives and their work is much longer than I can describe here. But Councilman Jake Fitisemanu Jr. was born in Wellington, New Zealand, to Karen Dang and Jacob Fitisemanu Sr. Jake was raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, and Taylorsville, Utah. He loves his Samoan, Chinese, and Korean American heritage. He graduated with honors in social sciences from Westminster College and also obtained a master's degree in public health from there. Jake co-founded the Utah Pacific Islander Health Coalition and has chaired the annual statewide Pacific Islander Health Week since 2012. He was also appointed to the U.S. Census National Advisory Council in 2014 and serves on the board of directors of the Asian Pacific Islander American Health Forum. In 2015, Jake was appointed by President Barack Obama to the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Jake is the director of the UDOH Health Clinics of Utah and lives in West Valley City, where he serves on the City Council. And our second guest speaker tonight is Margarita Satini. She's a social justice warrior. She's a passionate community activist and advocate for Pacific Islanders and works towards bolstering civic engagement participation within our community as the director of UPASEC, or the Utah Pacific Islanders Civic Engagement Coalition. Margarita has years of experience running political campaigns, conducting community lobbying, training, and working in underrepresented and underserved communities. Currently, she has been focused on ensuring an accurate count for Utah's Pacific Islander community for the 2020 census. Margarita lives in Midvale, Utah, with her partner, James, and their 4 children, 3 sons and 1 daughter, and 4 grandkids, 3 sons and 1 granddaughter. So welcome, you two.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Mona?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you for both of you. I like to use this also as just a icebreaker. What are your, oh, we'll just have it. We'll wait for Mana to take down the screen so it's just us.
I'm so
There we
sorry.
go. No worries. As you can see, we bring the community with us and our families wherever we go. And now Zoom just breaks down that that fourth wall. So I'm so excited for both of you to be here today. And our very first, most important question that we like to break the ice with is, what is your favorite Pacific Islander band or singer? It's one of the most pressing questions we have today. Please share. Popcorn out.
I think locally, my favorite is Makisi. Makisi is straight up from Glendale. So he's a 104 guy, you know, but his voice is very crystal clear. Like he just hits them notes. And then my favorite band, I don't know. I have quite a few favorite bands. I have a favorite cover band, which is Smiling Souls. I also love, you know, Fiji is the original. So there's really a bunch. It's hard to, those are just to name a few.
Yeah, I have, I actually like all of Rita's suggestions too, but there's too many modern or contemporary folks that I like and music. I can't pick one, but I think like a classic one that I have is Loyal Garner. She was the leader of this group called the Local Divas. It was actually my mom's favorite singer back in Hawaii. She was making music in the 80s, and she already passed away. But yeah, that lady's jams are like they're still in my head after all these years, and I still play her music. I was like, it's old, but it's good. So yeah, Loyal Garner, that's my jam for Hawaiian music.
Oh, that's one I've never heard of. So we need to, I think we need to start making a list from the Pacifica webinar series. But it probably, I like asking that question because it tells us A, where you're from and probably who you're connected to, and B, it dates you. Even though both of you look super young, you know, we know you're from the era of Fiji, and so thank you both for participating today. I think what came about with this discussion was Kalei and I were talking, and when we were developing the series and just thinking about what's most pressing and important for our community right now and questions that we have. And of course, next week is the end, or in 2 weeks, we finally find out who will win the presidential election. And so we wanted to bring on a few folks to have a discussion about voting in the time of Corona. And it may be politically charged, but most of these questions are focused more about participation and what helps motivate folks, since both of you have been doing this for a while, Pacific Islanders, to get out there and vote. And for those who haven't been able to vote, I just turned in my ballot, our family's ballot, this past week, and just getting out more information for folks who haven't voted, are still on the fence and want to learn more. So one of the big questions that I sent with you all, and feel free to just have a chat, like make this like a talanoa, but one of the questions I wanted to start out with is, why does voting matter anyway here in the United States? It's big, but it's important. I think just to ground us and start out from there.
Jacob, do you want to answer that, or I mean, I guess we could just Talanoa, right? We can just talk about it. I mean, and so the question is like, why is voting so important, correct? Right? So the world that we want to live in, the world we imagine for our children, for our families, for our communities, requires us to be civically engaged. So if I want my children to have access to affordable education, higher education, or if I want my children to have access to affordable healthcare, it's going to require me to be civically engaged. And the first basic step for being civically engaged is registering to vote. That's basic step number one. So in order for me to get what I want for my family, for my community, I have to vote. And I have to vote for the people who are going to champion those causes. That's why voting is so crucial. It's the most important thing in civic engagement, so that's my answer.
Thank you, Ida.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I recently came across a quote that actually I came across it again. But Uncle Walter Riddy, who's a Hawaiian activist and community leader from Molokai, he loves to tell people, and I forget the Hawaiian proverb or the Hawaiian language version, but he loves to tell people that my vote is my spear. And he relates voting and civic engagement and political involvement. He ties that back to historically to his own family, not necessarily the chiefs or the kings or the ali'i, but the guards and the warriors and the folks who were on the front lines. And that in the old days, you would apply the spear in defense of your family and to promote the leaders and those who would serve the best interests of the people and defend against those people and those things that would not be improving your community or that would harm the community. And I really love that analogy that today, we're not walking around with spears anymore, but we are still facing threats to our community. And we still have great ideas and great candidates and great people who want to support our community. And so our spear today is our vote. And so why vote? Yeah. Maybe you're in a party that's not the predominant party in your community, or maybe your state is not one of those major swing states that they talk about on the news that can make or break an election. Maybe you don't feel that your one vote, especially if it's a dissenting vote against a majority of people who you suspect are voting the other way, that vote still matters, right? In a battle, every single spear that our ancestors would wield mattered. And the side that had the most spears or had the strongest bodies behind those spears were the ones that were going to win. And so that analogy still holds true today. And I think that that's a really good way to put it. And I think one that resonates with me personally about why we should vote. Even if you may be the only person voting for the candidate or for the issue that you're voting for, it's important to be heard, even if it's a dissenting vote, to let other people know that this is an issue that you're concerned about, or that this is a cause that you're concerned about. And maybe you'll change minds, maybe you won't, but at least you'll have your opinion inserted and your voice elevated in that way.
I think that goes perfectly with the second question I have, which I think Jake partially answered, but what do you say, especially to a lot of the young folks who are able to vote and don't have the same barriers that, say, our immigrant parents or the first generation that came to the United States has, such as they're already citizens, they speak English. What would you say to them when they say, who said that my vote even matters? Jake spoke a little bit to this, but what would you say, Margarita?
I mean, if they're watching the news, if they're not living under a rock, they should know that, in different areas throughout the United States, there is a true effort to suppress votes. And if voting didn't matter, the powers that be that we can't see wouldn't be working so hard to take away our ability to vote. They wouldn't be purging, thousands of names from the voter rolls. They wouldn't be taking away rights from people who have served their time and their ability to vote. They wouldn't be allowing for early voting to happen. And here in Utah, back in 2018, they just barely passed. Oh, no. Let me rephrase that. For 11 years, Utah fought to make it possible for people to vote, to register same day, vote same day. 11 years. That's 11 years. Now, if these people didn't think your vote didn't matter, these kinds of movements wouldn't happen. I'm trying to think of something else. Oh, and also back in 2018. So 2018, they had passed a bill that allowed for anyone that was 17 years old who was turning 18 that same year to vote in a primary election. Like, these are things that have been going on behind the scenes to allow for more access to voter rights, you know? So it breaks my heart every time I have to have this conversation with people about the importance of why, you know, why their votes are important and why it matters, and that we continue to have these conversations. The fact that we've been having these conversations tells me that the people who are trying to suppress these votes are doing a magnificent job, because they have you doubting the power of your voice and your vote. So we have to keep fighting.
Yeah. Jake, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I'm glad that you brought it up as a kind of a generational thing. And many of our parents or our grandparents were not U.S. citizens. Maybe they were U.S. nationals from American Samoa. Maybe they were immigrants who never were able to naturalize. And so growing up in a community where that generation of leaders and people who model what good behavior looks like, if you didn't have that growing up and you didn't see that, that would be something new, number one, and something foreign. Pretty much, it was something for other communities to do. It was something that other people and other individuals did, but maybe not our community. I would just add onto what Rita had mentioned that it's different now, especially for people who are born and raised here, who vote. You know, it's like that Flow Rida song. You know, I love when that chorus where he's just singing like, "Welcome to my house. You know, we're gonna take control now. We're not house guests. Our parents or our grandparents may have felt like guests in America. They were just happy to be here, make a living, keep your nose clean, don't get in trouble. Thank you. Be very grateful to America for everything you've given us." But we are not house guests. Well, this generation are no longer guests in America. This is our house, and we have the right, we have the responsibility to take care of this house and to really control how we want this house to work. And just like any family, not everybody's going to agree, and not everybody has the same roles, but at least being part of that discussion on how this house is going to operate, what this house is going to look like, and how the people within this family are going to operate. I think that's another analogy that works for our community, the house guest versus the home owner. And that's really what we're moving into and what we should be emphasizing with the youth who are here growing up in this country. Even if they haven't voted before, this is your house and you have a say in how this house is run and what this house is going to look like in the future for your own kids and grandkids down the line.
So continuing with this analogy that you've done with a house guest and homeowner, some of the most pressing issues right now overall for all demographics is housing, affordable housing. We have affordable health care. Of course, with the pandemic, as we move into those questions. But what do you see for Pacific Islanders is the single most pressing issue that we have right now, going into this election cycle, as well as beyond November, the first November of this month of November, right? What from the experiences that you two have had on the ground, and especially working with all these different groups, that Jake from his healthcare perspective, and also Margarita from your perspective with the census, what do you see is the most important issue leading into this 2021 and beyond?
Man, that's a loaded question right there. Because, you know, and I should have updated my bio because the census is now over. So, but, you know, so I do a lot of work for Jake and his coalition. And right now we have a contract with the Office of Health Disparities to do work on the ground, to work with our community members, to get them educated, get them resources, so that they can fight through this this pandemic that we're currently in. And what we're noticing is not only are we fighting the primary effects of COVID, which is the physical, you know, aspects of it, we are also dealing with a huge wave of secondary effects. So people who have been impacted financially, right? And we work together with a national organization called National Capacity. and their whole focus is on housing. And in Utah, they had from the American Census Survey, the ACS in 2017, about 71% Tongans in Salt Lake County are rent burdened, and and what that means is about 30% of their income goes towards rent. So you're looking at a lot of people who don't own their homes, who live in multi-generational homes, and because of this pandemic, if I have one person in my home who gets this virus, sure enough, you can count on it ransacking the whole house, because I live in a small space, I rent it, I live in a multi-generational home. So I don't even know how to answer that question. There's so many, housing is one of them, access to healthcare is one of them, economics, jobs, and we're not even, when people say, oh, essential workers, I hate that, because we're being treated as expendable. We're not being treated, this is not an essential, we're being treated like we're easily expendable. We can get rid of these people. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think Jacob might have a better answer for this, because we're seeing people on the ground that just, it makes it hard for me to answer this question, because there's so many.
Yeah, there are so many, and I don't know that I have a single one that I could pick, because the most pressing issue in my life changes every day, and in our community changes every day, depending on, did we have an officer involved shooting or incident in the community? Then that becomes urgent. Did a new report come out showing that we have, increasing disparities or downward trending in terms of higher education attainment or high school education? Then that becomes the main. I mean, everything is going to be important at some time of the day or during some time during the year. We're going to go through a whole spectrum of different issues that are going to be equally valid and equally pressing. I think if there's one issue, to get to your question, that I see as a problem, and I think this is across the board, this is multifactorial, this crosses different sectors and issues and all the political parties, is misinformation, or either not having information, or not being able to fully or adequately critique the information we get. Am I voting for this person because everyone else around me is voting for this person, or is it because I really studied this dude's, or this individual's platform, and the things that they really are working on or want to advance align with my conscience and align with my beliefs as a person, right? Or do I say this particular thing about this particular party or issue because I saw a really clever meme about it, or somebody at church told me about it? Or did I do my research, and did I check on at least one other news source besides the one that I typically go to? Did I talk to anybody on that side of the aisle about it, or did I just make an assumption that, yeah, they all think like that, yeah, they all believe in that, and that makes them bad people for doing that? For me, in my role as an educator, that's kind of my big thing. And I tell my classes every semester, I don't really care if they learn or memorize or digest the content that I'm sharing during the class. What I really want them to get out of that semester experience is, did I learn how to read more carefully? Did I learn how to critique the information that I'm digesting? Did I learn to fact check everything before I regurgitate this information? And to be honest, although I have my preferences, obviously we all do, if somebody comes to me with a different line of thought or a different opinion, and I can tell that they've researched it, and I can tell that they have a conviction based on some facts and some cross-referencing and some actual discussion, I respect that. I may not agree with it, but I will totally respect their opinion for that. If you come to me and say X, Y, and Z about this dude and that dude because you saw a clever meme, or because your mother-in-law told you this over the dinner table, I'll take that with a grain of salt. I'll let you do what you want to do, but I'm not going to engage in that conversation. I'm not going to waste time trying to educate somebody who, although I do want them to go and research it, some people just want to have an argument, and some people really want to learn and really want to see both sides of the issue. And I've been schooled many times on assumptions that I've had as well, right? And so this goes in all directions in both ways. But I think the prevalence of misinformation or the apathy that we have as Americans to just kind of take whatever, you know, fits us or suits us or feels good, rather than actually fact checking and cross referencing and double checking, I think is something that is an issue across the board when it comes to voting.
I totally agree. And I saw Margarita like just shaking her head. I think too is for me, I too can respect someone who disagrees with me, but it also has to lead it has to come from a place that I can understand why they disagree with me, a factual place. And so my next question is, then how do you combat that? That's like an assault on intellectualism, an assault on like questioning, on even like if we think about this democracy, that it was built upon an informed citizenry, an informed citizenry, and when the information is disinformation or misinformation, how on a grassroots level are we even able to help folks? So I see what Margarita was saying is so multi-level, where it's like, okay, we have to tell folks to vote, but then the other level that Jake is even talking about is like, and if you are voting, please research what you're talking about. How do we engage folks, young folks, old folks? I think it's multi-generational in these, or push them in some way, or invite them. I don't know. How do we get folks or combat that?
That's such a difficult conversation to have. It's so easy for people to just fall in line with like the rest of the, you know, the talking heads. So I mean, you know, my coalition is 501c3, so we have to stick to just educating. That's it. We can't weigh in on one or the other. We just have to continue to educate. Is it a sure, safe way to like get convinced? Not, I don't even know if convincing is the right word.
Some people selling it on the street.
The hope is that it is a good way to open up opportunities for dialogue. But I'm telling you, given the work that we're doing right now on the ground for COVID, like we're not just fighting against a virus, we're fighting against misinformation, you know. And out of the two, that's probably the most dangerous for me, is fighting the misinformation, you know, because it makes it hard for us to like preach, hey, please practice the safety directives, please stay home, please wash your hands, please wear a mask when you go out, like, you know, because every time we battle those things that in public, we get challenged by our own communities, you know, which is like, what the heck, are you serious? It's because of all the information that's floating out there, you know. So we're educating, we're sharing, we're hoping to provide space for learning, but it is, holy hell, it is not easy. It's not easy at all.
I think something we have to understand when ourselves, before we can help other people understand, is that everything's biased. As objective as we would love to have the world, I would love to have one website that you can compare two candidates or compare different issues, and it's just strictly objective, right? But the fact is, as long as there's a human component to it, as long as there's somebody who's doing this research and entering this data onto a website, and that human touch is going to add some kind of a bias in it, even if it's unintentional. And so I think an important thing that we have to do when we are researching candidates, when we are researching, is to get as close to the original source as possible, number one, right? If you heard it from somebody who heard it from somebody who heard it from somewhere, who read it from somewhere, that's probably, it may be accurate, but most likely that message has been garbled along the way, right? So and we all get that information, you know, the same, or a meme that's been passed around a million times that has a lot of likes. Yeah, it may be clever, it may be funny and witty, but what is that actually referring to? Going into as close to the source as possible is one thing, and then looking at as many sources as you possibly can. I think this is easier than it has been, even though, like Rita said, it's tough to weed through some of this stuff that may appear really legit and may look really credible. But the more angles you can look at things, the more perspectives you can get at it, you can get out of it, rather than just going from your one same source of news every single day. That's another way that we can help address that. And then there are, some tools out there. I mean, definitely reading, for example, we have these, constitutional amendments on the Utah ballot this year. And a lot of times, you open the ballot and you see it for the first time and there's a summary there, but yeah, go into it. You can get online, you can read the original text, you can read the full text of it, you can read descriptions of what it means, so that you can have a better informed, you can have more information to help inform your vote when it comes down to it. So that all of that sounds really time consuming and very academic and nerdy. But when it comes down to it, you feel good about what you voted on if you did that. And I think you'll feel better about that vote than you would have to just say, yeah, I feel good about this vote because that's how everyone around me is voting, or, the people from my church are voting that way, etc. You can, even if it is in alignment with those people, you can say, yeah, but it's because I did some research on it. I went to a couple different websites. I looked at some different sites. I went to the original source, and that's why I'm voting on it. And if it aligns with the people around you, awesome. If not, that makes for very interesting Thanksgiving dinners.
And they have like different organizations out there that put out ballot guides. So it'll help you get through those amendments that are on the ballot. And they also have a website that helps with judges, how they're scored. Now, I'm not gonna weigh in on that because Jake already knows I have issue with that, and that's a whole different discussion. But they do have, they supposedly had an independent organization that did the ranking of these judges, So I'm hoping that we can come up with a better system of scoring and ranking these judges, because I just don't. Anyways, that's a whole nother conversation. But there are organizations, some of which you may follow, that would have, some information on the ballots, the ballot initiatives, any of the amendments that are on the ballots that you could, study up on and find out. So that way you can make a clear and educated decision when you're voting for or against any of these amendments.
Do you think there will ever be a time where, well, I don't know if this is a UPSEC thing, or would provide about something like that in terms of saying this is who we would support as a candidate, or are you all, what's the word? I can't think of the word. You are neutral in that sense, but like providing, especially if it were for judges or for the amendment pieces. I don't know. What I've seen is like, you can sample ballot, you email, like you Google that, and it will come up with like a Democratic ticket or a Republican ticket. But I would wonder if that would be something helpful to folks in terms of like, these are the most important issues happening in Pacific Islander communities based on data, right?
Yeah, so we just haven't really been focused on it this year because we've been so focused on COVID, but the goal is to get to that point. Now, we're part of a national organization. It's PICOPSI, the Pacific Islander Care of Excellence. Did I say that right, Jacob? And we have a national policy team. Joseph Saia and I lead the national policy team. Somebody tricked me into like leading the national policy team. Someone on this panel, but I'm not going to say who.
It wasn't me, so.
But we had already brought up, one of our tasks is to come up with like a 10-point agenda about things that are most important to Pacific Islander communities. And if legislators are looking for endorsement or support from the Pacific Islander community, they have to meet, a certain percent of this 10-point agenda, whatever that looks like. It may not even be 10 points, and then we also are hiring an independent crew to do homework or do studies on what is it that makes Pacific Islanders vote? What are the things that make us tip during an election? And I cannot wait, because that's exactly the kind of information that we need. Like, what makes our people tick, what makes them join, what makes them vote. Because I remember when UPSEC was up and running back in 2014, nobody was interested in politics. That has changed so much. And I have to give credit to the people that are part of UPSEC, because we had those conversations so early, back in 2014, when we were having those conversations and people were like not interested. And now people are so interested. We now have more Pacific Islanders in office here in Utah, and which is amazing. Jacob being one of them, Councilman Fitisemanu. And then it's just been an amazing turn of events from the time of 2014 to 2020, how much people are more involved and want to have a say in our country, in our political affairs, So I'm very proud of our people, for wanting to get more involved. We still have a lot of work to do, but be on the lookout for these things to happen. I'm excited.
Thank you. I think the other question is, how has COVID affected, as you both have seen on the ground, the level of participation, as well as just like the types? Well, you kind of alluded to it, Margarita. Are you seeing more folks engaged because on a day-to-day basis now with COVID? Like, not that they're, I don't want to gaslight any other issues, but so one of the silver linings, would you say, is that people are like saying, yeah, I'm going to participate because my voice isn't being heard in any other kind of outlet.
And many of us are working from home, so we now have a little more time to be able to focus on, like, these civic issues, right? So we have more time to dig into it a little bit more and to get more involved. I think this has definitely opened up access to a lot more. Like, there's like a bunch of meetings I used to not be able to attend because I had to show up in person, but because of our huge pivot to digital reality, like, I am now able to attend a lot of meetings that I wasn't able to before. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, because I feel a little zoomed out, but I feel like people have more. And Councilman, thank you, Jake. I appreciate that. We have. Let me just name really quickly who I think off the top of my head are public servants, are active public servants. So we have Councilman Fitisemanu, Councilwoman Weepy. We have AG Reyes. We have Robert, what's his first name? Jacob Roberts. He's a legislator in Hawaii.
Mark
Roberts. Who else do we have? Anyone else?
Have some folks.
We have Michelle. We have Michelle Tutupo, who's part of the Salt Lake City School Board. So we're kind of in a unique situation here in Utah, where we actually have more than we've had before of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders who are active public servants. I forgot where we were at before that. I apologize. I just felt like I had to correct. I had to bring those up. I'll have to come back to me. You'll have to come back to me, Juana.
Okay.
Yeah, we were talking about effects of COVID
Go
on
for
political involvement. I think one of the big discussions that has come up, which is so interesting in Utah, because Utah has been doing vote by mail and doing it well for years.
Yeah.
But on the national conversation, a lot of folks are questioning or actively fighting against the option for people to vote by mail. And during a pandemic, when we're being encouraged to stay away from other people and large gatherings and lining up and breathing each other's respiratory droplets and everything else, that seemed to a lot of people here in Utah like a no-brainer, because it's like, well, we've been doing that for a minute. And that's not something that's odd. And so I think that conversation has been really interesting to see how the Republican Party and Republicans here in Utah, who have been accustomed to this, who have expected it, who see it as a good system, but nationally, the Republican Party has been trashing it as much as they possibly can as a way to do it. And granted, there are probably states that don't do it as well as Utah does it in terms of keeping the voter rolls updated or, that kind of thing. And so I get it. Again, I have to do my fact checking and take a look at other states and take a look at cases of errors in mail, vote by mail type of thing as well. But I think that's one that was kind of maybe exaggerated or maybe trickled over to the Utah conversations, to where a lot of folks here are like, oh yeah, that's bad. And that's, we shouldn't be doing that, or it's not safe. And it's kind of like, well, if we do our fact checking here in Utah, we've been doing it for a while. We've been doing it very well. And it hasn't been shown to increase voter fraud or to be used as voter suppressive by either side of the aisle. And so in terms of COVID effect or impact, yeah, that's definitely one. When people don't want to go to a polling place that's crowded, or potentially, line up with folks maybe for hours and hours, right? Depending on elections in the past, that has been a thing, right? Where people have been waiting for a long time. And so that is definitely an impact that the pandemic has had on the perception around voting. If the result is that more people do vote by mail, or even take their mail-in ballot and drop it off in person, right, to one of the drop boxes or a vote center, I think that's a good thing as well. Hopefully, it's not scaring off people from participating in voting because they don't have to do it in person. And so I think that's one conversation that I've noticed happening, especially in light of the pandemic.
Especially here in Utah, since Utah is such an uber conservative state, and it's been, like you said, Jake, and I echo everything you just said, like that, it's been working really well. And I think mail-in ballots were introduced in 2013. I remember filling out my first mail-in ballot in 2014. And I love the fact that they mail it out early to you, and it gives you an opportunity to do your homework on candidates issues, on some of the ballot measures that are on the, like the amendments, some of the propositions. Like, it gives you an opportunity to you have it gives you a lot of time to do your homework on it. So I absolutely love voting by mail. I also trust our USPS system. But if you're worried about it, you can still ask for a ballot, a mail-in ballot, fill it out, and then you can take it in yourself to your elections office. Like, I would take mine to Salt Lake County to Sherry Swenson's office, and I would just drop it off at the ballot box over there. If you feel like you just want that extra safety precaution. Like, there's so many different ways that you can feel safe about your vote being protected. And you can go online to vote Utah. I think it's vote.utah.gov. You can go and check you can monitor your registration status. You can check on your ballot to make sure that it's being counted.
Yeah. And I think we should, hopefully they make voting a day off, for us to be able to participate. I hope they do that one and push for it. And the other piece that we did that's so great with the mail-in ballot is that we voted just as a family. We just had dinner, and then everybody took out and normalizing that within our home, and having our children sit around and see that, look, we're participating. This is something that we just do. I think that that's a hugely important thing that we should be sharing with the next generation. It's just because I do realize that my children will be, there'll be a generation separated from the immigrant experience that my parents have had. And also, yeah, totally, English will be their native language. So I like the mail-in, and have been doing mail-in from for the first time we were able to do it, just because I was a college student, and then it's like, drive all the way over here to get it when I could just have it mailed to me. Probably one thing I was wondering too with that, and then we'll go into our next question. I don't want to be too inflammatory, but do you think a lot of that discussion around not having too much friction around mail-in ballots is because our state is so conservative and there's only one party that has the majority vote here?
I think so. I think that's exactly what it is, and it's been working so well for the Conservative Party. So, why fix something that's not broken? But like for others, like in other areas of the country, and especially where there are large populations of Black and Brown communities, that's where we're having these conversations of voter fraud and, voter suppression. And yeah, but yes, my answer to that is yes.
Yeah, I think also because the implementation is pretty much across the board with either an entire municipality or the entire state, the entire county. It's not something where you can pick and choose, or it's not like, well, this county, this part of the county does it this way, but these other guys don't. And so, I mean, if a mailman or a postal worker, was to dump out an entire bag of mail, unless they took the time to go through it, and split them up, they're going to be potentially tossing out a Republican vote or a Democrat vote or both at the same time. And so it's not, I think that's another reason why, even though it is a super majority here, I think even the minority party, is still cool with it because, that suppress or that piece that could be partial or bias suppression is at least minimized. I guess it would harm both rather than just one. But I don't know all the math and the details on that, so don't quote me. But that's my own theory. I saw it in a meme.
I was gonna say, did you do your fact checking?
I used to love memes. They're so cool, but this politics stuff is too much. I can't do memes anymore because of that.
So I wanted to open up some time for some Q&A. So for those of you who have a couple of questions, we can answer. We'll have time for 2 questions, I think would be. I'm new to this, so I probably should have alerted you all to type in on the bottom of your screens in Q&A a couple of questions, and then we'll read through some of them. But while people are putting up questions, I wanted to ask on a more personal level, both of you, how has being part of the Pacific Islander community affected the way you participate in politics? We've been talking a lot about voting, but how has your upbringing affected? Like, for instance, you started a nonprofit that had to do with voting and civic engagement, and then Jake is a council member. But what about being Pacific Islander and growing up Pacific Islander maybe motivated you, propelled you, or made you, or you just fell into it?
My upbringing has really shaped my love of politics and really grassroots activism and advocacy work. Like I consider myself to be an activist and an advocate, and it had a lot to do with my upbringing. I grew up very, very poor in Salt Lake City, when we moved here from California, and I didn't have mentors. I didn't know the power of my voice or my parents. My parents were immigrants, and so we were all in survival mode, and now I am mentoring other people, to fight for what they believe should be the future of their children or their own future. And I'm doing the same thing because, again, nobody took the time to walk me through that. And I wish to God I would have had a mentor that would have saw in me like, you know what, she's got some fight in her. Let's take her and shape her and send her on her way to help our community. And I've seen it with other community members, how we all were in survival mode and we all grew up very poor and we all grew up next to each other, and I really wish that's one of probably my biggest, I wish for my past is that I had a mentor. And I'm happy when I'm able to mentor anyone, in the youth and young adult. Well, I'm working on a bunch of campaigns that I would have never expected myself to work on. I'm working on The racism is a public health crisis. We're hoping to pass that throughout the state, and we're starting with West Valley. We're working on low-income energy efficiency projects. We're working on, protecting utilities because people are losing their jobs and are unable to afford to keep their lights on because of COVID. And we're working on fighting, the Rocky Mountain Power because they want to up their rates on existing customers, and that's not cool during a pandemic. So these are all these things that have happened because I just started volunteering like crazy and learning and being mentored at an old age. You're never too old to be mentored. So, yeah.
I really like that. No, thank you, Rita. I really like that question because I remember I was 8 or 9 years old, but I distinctly remember my dad's citizenship ceremony and us going to the courthouse, and he put his hand up and they recited this oath, and his passion for voting and the context behind that is Samoa did not have universal suffrage until the very, very recently. In fact, my dad's whole adult life, only chiefs could vote or stand for office, which were mainly men. And so even though it didn't discount women from the vote, customarily it did. And so I remember his first time being able to vote, and him, the pride and the excitement of him to be able to voice directly his opinion in terms of who was going to be leading his community and what kinds of issues might have been on the ballot. I remember that very distinctly as being a turning point in the family. After that, voting became, it was just an expectation. And as kids, just like Moana, you had mentioned, your kids see that there's normalcy around voting, around opening a ballot at the table and mom and dad and everyone else filling out this ballot, having these sparring sessions about, who's the best candidate or what you prefer in terms of political parties. And so for us, from the age of 9 on, that was very, very normal for us. We knew when mom and dad were going to the polls. We knew when they were going to precinct meetings, voting, going to caucus, being a precinct chair, or a secretary. These were all very normal for us. And I never saw my parents as being politicians. I never associated that with being quote unquote political because it was just normal. And so even though it took a lot of goading and a lot of encouragement for me to run for office, I happily did that. Even though I was hesitant, and there are some, I still hate campaigning, and there are parts of this system that are that just don't align with me in terms of self-promotion. Hey, I'm wearing a shirt with my name on it, like that kind of stuff. I'm still not cool with it for sure, but I can still do that without feeling like a politician because of the way I was brought up. I understand that everything has, for example, the fee that we pay when we register our car, or who fixes the potholes on the road, or when I turn the tap on, is the water going to be yellow or is it going to be clear? All of these everyday decisions, somebody made a policy that dictates that, and somebody made that decision somewhere. And 9 times out of 10, that was an elected official or a politician, if you want to call it that. And so these are very everyday, mundane, normal issues. But the process and the people who make these decisions and make these policies, we see them as being disconnected from the community. They're the politicians. We even say things like on the Hill or in DC. But I think my upbringing really was, well, yeah, they may be making decisions on the Hill or in DC, but the people who are making those decisions are being elected right here at the kitchen table. And so I think that being able to normalize that, or feeling that was a normal process, without being a quote unquote political process, that was big for me. And I only realized that now as a 37-year-old dude. Obviously when I was 9, I didn't get that, but I see that now. And that's why today, when we went and dropped off our stuff in the mail, we took our daughters with us. They put it in the mailbox. They got to participate in the process, just like your kids, Moana, just like your grandkids, Margarita. And it's not, it didn't just, now that I'm older and I have this nerd, empirical researching mind, I look back and see that this is not anything new in our community. We can look all the way back to the even before colonization, but it's very salient in the colonial era when we look at the Mau movement in Samoa, when we look at the Ku'e petitions in Hawaii. My mom's family big with the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, with even here when the first Pacific Islanders were moving here to Utah in the time of Yosepa and Warm Springs, and we have people, very inspirational people like Hannah Kaeapa and others who were doing today we call it lobbying and advocacy and legislating. And again, we have all these political terms to it. But these were all very quote unquote political movements and actions and activities that are ingrained in our history as a nation, as indigenous people, in our families, in our clans, in our genealogies. And this American democracy experiment that we're in now is just, to me, is a continuation of that journey that our ancestors have been civically engaged in many ways for as long as our people have been in the islands. And I think this is just a continuation of that.
Thank you. And that segues really well to one of the questions we have here is, instead of making it so political, here, our question from one of our attendees is, on the topic of this 2020 election, there have been a lot of different views and perspectives on politics and issues we face in the US. How do we have productive conversations with people who have different views than we do, especially in the Pacific Islander community? I would like to know too, because in a multi-generational home, we have different views than the OGs in our house. And sometimes bridging those divides is an interesting dinner conversation in and of itself. But I'm happy to say I still love those people in my family, even though we have very opposing views. But for both of you, how do you have, I really like that, productive conversations with people who have different views.
I'm a huge advocate for universal basic income. And I remember posting on my wall some thoughts about universal basic income, and a Tongan guy who is, he doesn't want a community work in his Methodist church, responded and said, well, we take pride in the work that we do, and this would just, make it so that people wouldn't want to work. So then we sat down, we actually had a good conversation, and I said, I don't think that's the case. I think what it does is it changes what work looks like for our people. Instead of working a 9-to-5 and lining the pockets of somebody else, you have an opportunity now to build generational wealth within your own family. And so now the work that you're doing has shifted, and he's like, oh, I didn't even think about that, and I said, yeah, I think you should think about that and see, how you feel about it. And he goes, I actually like that idea, making sure that he's not trying to be lazy or anything. He's just shifting the way work looks in his family and what a universal basic income would do for his family, So it was just that type of conversation, like sitting down, just discussing what it looks like from both sides. And it was really cool.
I would say for me, what's very important to have a productive conversation. And I know that we all have these conversations, and it gets tricky even within our own families. But for me, it's important to set up ground rules. And that sounds weird, but I do. I sit down, and I've done this with my mom, my own mother, my own dad, my own uncles and aunties, and say, look, when they send something like, oh, did you see what so-and-so did? Either, the president is so awesome that he did this, or the other guy is so terrible because they believe this. That's always how it starts. And I say, yes, I saw that. Do you really want to talk about that issue? Or are you just promoting your candidate? Or are you just criticizing mine? And so that's my first question. Because if they want to talk about an issue, or they want to talk about a point on a party platform, or they want to talk about a particular piece of legislation or a policy, I'm down to talk about it. What my ground rules are, if anybody gets aggressive, including myself, it ends immediately, because to me, it's not worth tainting a family relationship. It's not worth, putting cracks into a friendship at that point. To me, it's just not worth it. I would rather keep my family or my friend relationship than have one little disagreement about a candidate or an issue break that apart. So that's my big rule: is I discuss issues, I don't get personal. Number two is I don't let it get aggressive, or I don't let it get to where it hurts individually, where it hurts personally. But I love having those discussions with those ground rules around it. And I have found that, yeah, I can go to lunch. Last Saturday, I went to lunch, social distance, PPE, yes, but I did go to lunch with somebody who is very on the other end of the spectrum in terms of politics from where I am. And we sat there for an hour and a half and had what was called a productive, cordial conversation. We're still able to be friends. We still, did the fist bump before we left. And it was clear that we weren't going to change each other's minds, but we still had a really great discussion about it, because we decided up front, and look, let's enjoy this meal. Let's talk about issues, but let's not get crazy with it. For me, that's kind of my advice. Just put some ground rules around those discussions. And if it gets too crazy, just cut it. Just keep enjoying the eating, enjoy the turkey and the stuffing. Don't need to get into all that stuff right then and there.
Yes, I think that you need those rules plastered on Facebook. And no name calling after one person says one thing and it has nothing to do with the politics in and of itself. We're gonna answer, since we only have a few questions, if you don't mind taking a little bit more of your time than 1 hour, we're gonna ask them, and then we'll close out. So we just have a couple more questions. One from Dr. Tevita Kaili. He says, thank you, Jacob and Margarita. What are your thoughts about the two political parties and their engagement with Pacific Islanders?
Terrible. They both could do a lot. I mean, they both have a lot of work to do to engage the Pacific Islander community, and that's my answer to that question. But I'm not even gonna go. I have this, this would turn really ugly, so I'm not even gonna bring it up. But I honestly, Dr. Kaili, it's a great question, but given somebody who on paper is a Democrat, like the Democrats have a lot of work they need to do. They consider themselves to be a big tent party, but they've failed as far as engaging like communities of color, and especially Pacific Islanders. They don't do a really good job of outreach to us, and I know this because I for a while there was deep into the Democratic political party, and being a delegate myself, and I'm not only that, but as a vice chair for the Asian American Pacific Islander caucus for the entire state of Utah. And of course, Verona Maunga is the chair. So, I mean, it's probably the first time ever that you'll see two Pacific Islander women who run, a state party, a state caucus like that. It is very difficult, the relationship with, AAPI, but especially with Pacific Islanders and both parties. I can safely say that. And they have a lot of work they need to do to be able to bring our Pacific Islander communities around, and they need to do that work. So.
Yeah, that's a complicated question for B2, because I feel like it's made to be so much more black and white than it really is. I think there's so much room in the gray, in the middle. Councilwoman Weepy and I have talked about this, in her independent streak, and I am, registered as a Democrat, but that doesn't mean that I haven't had my own disagreements or my own, nuances as a member of the party either, and at the local, the county, the state, and even the national level. And so I think that the two-party system inevitably, for better or for worse, no, not even for the better, it's for the worse, makes you choose sides. And I get that that's part of it, But I think the animosity or some of the aggression and some of the resentment that comes along with that political split, me personally, I feel is not only it's not productive. I think there's so much more that can be done to educate younger voters about um, what the platforms of the parties are, and that it's okay if you don't agree with 100% of that, and that just because someone isn't registered or isn't declared in your party doesn't make them a bad person. It makes them an awesome person who just has different opinions from you. And so I think I agree with what Rita said. There isn't enough engagement. There isn't enough productive engagement to engage folks by either and or party. And I think we don't do a real great job of sorting that out in our own families and in our own communities about what that means to stand for community and to be united as a people and still have plurality and multiplicity when it comes to political parties. And so I don't have a good answer or I don't have a good solution to that, but that's kind of my take on it.
And we have a lot of people in our community, probably a big chunk of our community who don't understand how these conventions work, you know? So if you have somebody who in your family is a Democrat that wants to run for House, the state Senate, right? And if they're running against somebody else that's also part of that party, you have to go through the convention so that you can come out on top to represent your Democratic Party. A lot of people don't understand that, they don't understand how that works. And so we definitely, it would be a plus for Democrats and Republicans to come up with, some way of sharing that, educating our communities about, how that works, how delegates work, how being a delegate works, how the delegate vote works, how these conventions work, and how that, getting your candidate past that process to be on the ballot, to primary, and eventually to general elections, how that works, I don't know.
I think thank you both for sharing and answering that question. And for those who, I wanted to close out with this final question from one of our students. I know that Jake finally partially answered with some information, but one of our students, Lehua Kono, who is also a Pasifika ambassador, asked, how are you all helping the community during COVID, and what can they do as members of the community, and specifically students who are listening in?
That's a great question. And I'll let Margarita fill in details since she and Margarita Satini co-chair the community health worker team for the Utah Pacific Islander Health Coalition. I would just to summarize the work that's being done, it's exhausting. I mean, there's a team of trained community health workers that are out working essentially full time in everything from the testing all the way through to follow-up services, rent and housing assistance, food assistance, working with, Rita can tell you the exact number, but over 70 different Pacific Islander owned businesses to ensure that their staff and customers are provided with adequate social distancing measures and PPE. In terms of what community can do, we have been really blessed with a very robust response from community in terms of not just technical assistance, but donations. We've supplied thousands and thousands of masks that have been donated by community partners, care kits that are Pacific Islander students from the University of Utah, the medical school and other programs. Put together almost 100 care kits to be distributed to different families and organizations to provide them with sanitization. Is that a word? Yeah, sanitization and personal protective equipment, gloves and masks and those type of things as well. So the services run a whole gamut. The coalition is trying very hard to be a one-stop shop, and even if it's a service or a resource that we don't offer directly, that we're able to connect folks in the language of their choosing to the resources that they need and to be that community connector. And I think that personal touch from the feedback that we have from folks that have been helped has been really crucial in that it's not that the county is not offering help. It's not that the state is not offering help. It's not that essentially every health system is providing free testing, for example, but having someone from the community, especially someone who can speak Marshallese or Samoan or Tongan, and has that kind of personal resonance and an understanding of family situations of you're not just coming in and say, well, wow, you've got all these people in this house. How are you going to social distance? How are you going to do this, etc. But finding solutions because we're familiar with those household situations. The feedback we're getting is that approach is almost as important as the actual resources and materials and services that are being provided. And so it's not perfect. We've got a lot of work to do. We could definitely use help. So I shared my email. Rita's information, I'm sure, will be shared as well. So Lehua and anyone else in the community, especially our student community, please reach out. There's a lot of ways to help, and we're happy to put you to work.
Yeah, definitely. We've passed out 10,000 masks, 10,000 plus masks to our community. We've identified 75 Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander businesses. We have partnered with the medical students up at the University of Utah to pass out, like Jake was saying, some of the hand sanitizations, like the hand sanitizers, sanitizing spray, sanitizing wipes. We've also partnered with some of the children's services where we've given clothes to brand spanking new clothes donated by department stores to families who are in need, and then of course we have several organizations we work through to provide rent relief and utility relief for families. And although we only make up a small percentage of Utah's total population, we have probably made up like 13% of the application process for rent relief and utility relief with some of these organizations. So we're continuing to do that, but the numbers continue to rise. So if you want to help us by sharing those information, the importance of following the safety directives, and also if they're looking for help on voter registration, point them in the direction of where they can go online to register to vote. I mean, those little things are huge, being able to share that information, because even though we think we're getting out to all of our community members, but it's even more helpful when other people are sharing that information and just getting that information even further and farther out to our people.
And we'll make this information available as well through our different platforms, social media platforms, especially to connect with Jake and Rita and the work that they're doing. Just want to thank both of you for joining us on our inaugural Pasifika webinar series. We're so grateful for the work that you both are doing now in the community. And hopefully maybe in the future you all will join us again. And thanks for I think just partially humanizing what's happening on the ground level, as well as saying like, hey, people from all different people from on different sides of the aisle can still have these types of productive conversations, as one of the questions set out. And you can even have a critical perspective of the party that you participate in, right? So I hope that, especially for the students, that is our main audience, but for all those who are joining us, thank you for participating and coming in and spending your Friday night with us. That's another silver lining of COVID, is that we're able to commune and collectively meet online on a Friday evening, because I know y'all don't got nowhere to go. So joining us, we like to invite you. We like to just thank all our contributors, specifically our Bridge team, the School of Transform, Education, Culture, and Society, and our faculty advisor, Dr. Vaughn, for helping us build this and put this together. Please remember to join us at our next Pacifica webinar on November 6th at 4 p.m. That'll be more for students, where we'll be discussing graduate resources, and it's entitled PIs Getting PhDs. And our guest speakers will be Dr. Aikau, Dr. Arvin, and Dr. Robinson, who are all faculty, Pacific Islander faculty here at the University of Utah. Also, make sure, I gotta give a plug for to subscribe and follow us on Instagram, U of U Pacifica Scholars, and then our Pacifica Archives, which this recording will be available as soon as possible on our YouTube channel. And so just thank you all. We'll make more information. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us through social media or by email. Till next time, dua o to all of you. Thank you.